set.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Welcome everybody to the Michigan Regional Coordinator interaction. We'll call it an interaction instead of a training. So I'm going to jump right into it. One of the very first things that we should all know how to do is access this database. If you don't know your login information, Mike is a good resource. Winona, I think you're a pretty good resource on that as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. I usually reach out to Mike for login issues, but everybody should have a login to this American Tree Farm System database. So let's start with that. So I'm going to log in. And to get to that website, usually you can save it, obviously, in your favorites, but it's just as easy to go to ATFS Database. I'll type that in Google, and it's either the first or second hit at the top of the list. So either way, we'll get you to that database login, which is the screen you just saw before I logged in. So one of the first things I'd like to show you guys, so this is the home page, right, is how to generate a list. And one of the more common lists that we need to do our duty is a list of what are called required inspections, which is a list that's given to us from national, and it's tied to the funding source for Tree Farm. So every region will have a list of required inspections for your region. And you need to have certain privileges in the database to be able to generate that list. So if you see on the left here, you've got certain features that pretty much anybody with the Tree Farm database login can access. But those of us that have the regional coordinator privileges can go to this one called Tree Farm Reports. So if you see I'm scrolling over here to Tree Farm Reports, I'm just clicking that to see the other options below that. And now maybe I want to see a list of required inspections for my region. So I'm the regional coordinator of Region 7. So I'm going to click required inspections here. So we've got Michigan up here. Click on that. That's obviously the state that we would want to select. For county, I'm not going to click anything for county, but you can if you want. If you want to see required inspections per county, that's an option. But what I'm going to do is go down here to Region 7 and click on that. I'm going to uncheck the outstanding only box. I don't think we really need that. I'm going to check the chat box too as we're going through this if I see messages pop up. So that'll be hopefully not a distraction for you guys. Oh, Nia had a good question. Actually, I'll kick this question to Winona or Mike. Do inspectors have database privileges to create new tree farms and tree farmers? I believe the answer is no, correct? We have to have regional coordinator privileges to create tree farmers and tree farms. Is that accurate?
That's correct. An inspector does not create new records in the database. An inspector can search the database, and an inspector can modify data regarding a tree farmer if they were the prior inspector. But an inspector cannot create a new record in the database. That's where they need help from the regional coordinators.
Okay, that's what I thought, but thanks for the confirmation, Mike. So again, this is really, you don't have to check a lot here to generate that list of required inspections. The bottom has a report format, right? So I like the Excel version, so I would click that, but you have these other options too, HTML, PDF, and CSV files. Excel is usually how they're given to us. So that's how I'm going to generate this. And then all I hit is OK. And if you guys see at the bottom of the screen, it automatically downloaded the file. So this would have gone just to my generic download folder on my computer. So I can go grab that file from there, change the name, save it to whatever folder I want to put it in. I'm not going to open that because I don't have permission, because this is recorded to display people's information other than Keaton Foster, who's the person we're going to do an inspection for today. But this is mostly just to show you the process. So that's pretty easy to generate a report. And you can do the same for these other categories. If you want to see where which priority inspections are in your area, you can look at that. If you want to just look at assigned inspections, there are lots of ways to generate different lists. And You can do all that under this section here called tree farm reports, which again, only the regional coordinators have that privilege to go in and generate these reports. And I'll ask Mike, Winona, I'm going to ask you guys another question. Is it still the case that we need to contact AFF to get somebody designated the status to have these privileges? Do we still need to reach out to Katie for that, or do one of you have the ability to make somebody a higher level in the database access?
I've always relied upon Katie to assign that level of status in the database. As state admins, I don't think we have capacity to modify that status. So whenever we have a new regional coordinator, we go straight to Katie at AFF to upgrade their database privileges.
Okay, that's what I thought. And we've had a little bit of turnover with regional coordinators in recent years. So this is definitely something that we have to do. Is maybe you were an active tree farm inspector, but then all of a sudden you became a regional coordinator. You have to reach out to Katie to get additional privileges so that you can do what you need to do as a regional coordinator, because you're no longer just doing inspections. You're actually approving inspections and creating tree farms and tree farms for your entire region. So that's all I had on generating a list. That's pretty simple in my opinion, but it's a really easy way to get access to, like, what are the inspections in your region. Does anybody have anything to add to that or questions on that before we move on to the next part? Okay.
Oh, really quick, Josh, I'm sorry, I was slow to click.
Yeah, no worries, Julie.
Could you just show us the Excel spreadsheet that was spit out? I'm just curious what it looks like.
I don't want to do that because that has people's information on it.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay.
Yep. So yeah, otherwise I would, but yeah, I'm a little concerned because we're recording this. I don't want to put people's information up there for anybody on the world to click on and see.
Good point, sir. Okay, thank you.
So just know that when you go through the steps, it will generate that Excel file, and it's going to look, you've seen the Excel files in the past, right? Like the one Winona sent out that had all the requireds listed.
Yeah.
It essentially looks like that. It's just a list with rows, and each row represents a tree farmer, and it has all the relevant information for that tree farmer. So there's a row per tree farmer, and then multiple columns represent different attributes, if that makes sense.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Okay, so now we're going to move on to creating that tree farmer and tree farm. So I want to give you a common example of how I receive inspections before we move on to this next step. And this is really going to vary for each region. But a common way that an inspector might send an inspection to me to approve and get certified is by simply sending a PDF file that's been completed. And by that, I mean they grabbed a blank 021 form and they just filled in the information. So what you're seeing here is one that I filled in already for Keaton Foster / Brickstone Farms. We're going to call it Brickstone Farms for the inspection. That's how he wants it designated. So this is a blank 021 form. You see it doesn't have a tree farm number yet. And the state is filled in, but it essentially got completed and sent. We're playing a hypothetical here. And the inspector says, regional coordinator, approve this inspection, please. So when you get a situation like this, it's really easy because you can take the information off the form they gave you and you can use that to create the tree farmer and the tree farm in the database, assign the inspection to the inspector who filled it out. And then you as a regional coordinator can email the form to that email that you've seen on other documents, inspectors@forestfoundation.org, or you can have the inspector do it. It's up to you. I can tell you it's easiest for me when an inspector sends me a form like this, and again, this is very common in my area, I take the information from the form, I create the tree farmer and the tree farm in the database. I assign the inspection to the inspector, and then I take on the role of emailing the completed form to that inspectors at forestfoundation.org. The reason I do that is sometimes there are little nitpicky errors that are essentially inconsequential to the bigger picture of the tree farm inspection. And if I get an error that's generated, as in the database didn't accept the email submission, it's a lot easier for me to fix that small error on the spot because I'm there checking my email anyway as I'm doing this. It's a lot easier for me to do that as a regional coordinator than it is to have a long back and forth with the inspector saying that, hey, you forgot to check this one yes box. So you have to kind of use your own judgment on what are the types of errors that you need to inform the inspector of that inspector needs to fix. And then what are the types of errors that you as a regional coordinator can simply take care of and get the ball rolling a lot quicker. An example of a minor error would be sometimes the inspector checks yes for the bigger picture question in a standard, which should automatically make the sub questions tied to that a yes, but maybe they forgot to click on the yes button on one of those sub questions as part of the bigger question. I have no problem going in as a regional coordinator and just checking those additional yeses for them. I inform them of that, of course, but that's an example of a minor error that we don't need to have a long back and forth with the inspector to get that addressed. An example of bigger errors that they actually need to fix is if they did not cite anything for how they looked up threatened and endangered species, or if they did not cite any resources for how they answered the question about archaeological sites. If they just totally ignored a section on forest health, for example, and didn't answer the questions, then these are things where I would say, okay, you need to complete these questions and kick the inspection back to me before I can approve it. Hopefully that makes sense. So again, this is just an example of a PDF that would have been sent and the content is completed, but the tree farmer, the tree farm, and the assignment, none of those things exist yet. That still has to be done, and that's fine. It can happen in a different order. That's no big deal. Oh, good point, Mike. So the email has to have a specific subject if you send a completed inspection using the PDF format, and the subject has to say upload 021. That's what it has to say in the heading. And the email itself is that inspectors@forestfoundation.org that I've mentioned a couple times now. Now, if it's a recertification, so right now we're talking about an initial inspection, right? This is a tree farmer who has never been a tree farmer before. This is a new one, if you will. If it is a recertification, the process is actually a lot easier because you can simply look up the tree farm and the tree farmer in the database because they should already be in there. And then it's just a matter of assigning that inspection to the inspector. And then the rest of the process is pretty similar as it would be for a new inspection. It would just be a recertification. So the main difference is with recertifications, you're not creating the tree farm and the tree farmer. You are just going through the inspection process, but you're still assigning it. And I can tell you, that's a common mistake that I run into. I don't know if the rest of you run into this, but it happened kind of recently, actually, which is you need to make sure that if a recertification is taking place, it needs to be assigned to the updated inspector, not just default to the last person who did the inspections, because you can grab a PDF file that has some information auto-filled from the database if it's a recertification. But if you don't assign that to the new inspector who's supposed to do it, it's going to autofill the inspector information of the previous inspector who did the inspection. And what it will autofill in this PDF is not editable, if that makes sense. At least I found it was not. I couldn't change the inspector information when the old inspector's info got autofilled because it got uploaded from the database. So you do have to make sure you're updating the assignment of the inspection to the new inspector. You guys just interrupt me if something's not clear as we're going through this. So we're going to create the tree farmer and the tree farm for this Brickstone Farms, which is this one. So again, let's pretend this was submitted to me as a PDF. Now I have to do some things to make this talk to the database. So the first thing I'm going to do, and there are multiple ways to do this. I'm sure some of you have even quicker ways to do this than I do. I'm just showing you one way to go about this. So first thing I go to is search, create records. And I'm going to go to individual, because this is where you would go for tree farmers, right? We're creating the tree farmer. And I'm going to create two. And the reason I'm going to do that is just to show you the difference. So in this case, the actual tree farmer is going to be Brickstone Farms, which is a maple syrup farm. And he does some other stuff too, right here in Manistee County. That is who the main owner / contact is going to be for this tree farm inspection. But I'm also going to create Keaton Foster, who is the owner of Brickstone Farms, and call him a co-owner, just so you guys can see the difference between an organization and a human being. So first, a way to generate the create new tree farmer real easy is just to type in Brickstone. I know that it's not going to be in here, but one reason I like to take this approach also is because sometimes I get names thrown at me with tree farm inspections that are being called new tree farmers. And what I discover is that they actually were in the database at some point. And the person didn't realize that, and the inspector didn't as well. So I usually like to search for a person no matter what, just to see, is there some archival record of this person being in here at some point. That way we don't duplicate an organization or a person in the tree farm database. In this case, I can confidently say Michigan. Just be careful about this sometimes if you're searching for a person, because this state is tied to their residence in most cases. So sometimes if you restrict this to Michigan, keep in mind you have tree farmers who they have certified tree farms in Michigan, but they might actually be from Ohio or somewhere else. So when you're searching for people in here, I usually do not select Michigan as the state. I will let it go across all states. That can be a little tedious sometimes if you have a name that's really common. But again, the state that they're associated with is tied to whatever their mailing address is. And that's not always Michigan, even if they have tree farms in Michigan. Hopefully that makes sense. In this case, I know that Keaton is not, he doesn't have anything tied to tree farm ever. So it's going to say no individual. So now it automatically pops up. When I hit search, it didn't find Brickstone. So now it's giving me the option to create a tree farmer. And that's what we're seeing here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So for the name organization in this case, we're calling it an organization. So it's Brickstone Farms. It's an organization, not a person, under type. And for preferred contact method, in this case, I'm going to put email. That's what Keaton told me. Got another chat message. All right, so Mike says adding a second owner to a tree farm is how we included children or other heirs in the next generation project. Creates two separate individuals and assign as the primary owner and the heir as the secondary owner. Yeah, and that's essentially what we're going to do, Mike, with Brickstone and Keaton Foster. And that'll make more sense as I go through this. So type, organization, preferred contact, email. When I create this initial tree farmer, I keep it bare bones, because when you fill out an inspection form, a lot of this other information that's not required is going to be filled in when you actually do the inspection. So I stick to the stuff that has the red asterisks, which is required. So primary address, we're going to call that work. If you enter the zip code, it'll pop up different choices for cities. So I know that it's Bear Lake. So this is the work address. And again, that'll fill the rest of this in if you enter the zip code, which is nice. We're not going to provide an alternate address. This is an example here. These aren't required fields, at least for this part. Typically, you're going to have this information in the inspection anyway. I'm going to go ahead and enter it anyhow, just because I have it. But you see, these aren't required fields we're seeing here anymore for phone or email. But I'm going to enter this stuff anyway, just because I have it on this PDF that was filled out ahead of time. You remember, you got to use hyphens with the phone numbers. Don't put parentheses in here. Sometimes it'll display as parentheses when you go back to look at it, but when you enter the phone number, just type the numbers with hyphens in between. I don't know if a lack of doing that generates an error under the 21 standards, but I know that was an issue with the 2015 to 2020 standards, I believe, at least in the PDF files. And then I just check primary over here. It's the only number I'm going to provide anyway. And then he did provide an email. So we'll put that in. This gets interesting, and if any of you have thoughts on this, I'm all ears. It's not clear to me if leaving these demographic questions blank will generate any sort of error. I haven't explored that example. What I've been doing for organizations is I just put prefer not to say. Obviously, as an organization, you're not going to pick gender, age, race, ethnicity, etc. Even though in this case, there's one owner tied to the organization. Typically, an organization is not a human, right? So, but to be safe, and again, I haven't tried this to see if leaving it blank is okay. Just to be safe, I just check prefer not to say. Actually, it doesn't even let you in the database. There you go. I'm not even able to click. But on the PDF file, on the PDF version of the 021, it still gives you the option to check those demographic boxes, even if you enter the primary owner as a organization. So just keep that in mind. So it's the PDF file where you have to decide whether to leave these questions blank or check prefer not to say. And I couldn't tell you if leaving them blank and then emailing it to inspectors@forestfoundation.org generates an error, or if you need to check prefer not to say. I haven't explored that yet to see what the result would be. Thankfully, if you enter it directly in the database here, it just automatically doesn't let you select stuff if you picked organization. So that makes sense. The rest of the stuff I'm just going to leave blank because this will autofill when you do the actual inspection. Actually, for now, I'm going to fill it in because we're going to enter the inspection on the database directly. So we're not going to use the PDF method. So this would not autofill. We're going to enter it here. So how did the landowner learn? In this case, it was word of mouth. Is the landowner participating in any of these following conservation activities? I'm going to put ecosystem restoration, invasive species management. The landowner is really active with invasive species management. Is the landowner participating in cost share? Yes. So for this one, I try to make this as detailed as I can. It's up to you. If you guys want to use shorthand and acronyms that you assume people understand, that's fine. I tend to type things out and not assume everybody knows our acronyms. So in this case, the landowner has active natural resources conservation service contracts. So this landowner has contracts through EQIP and CSP. Brickstone Farms is doing both. So once we've entered all that, we just hit create. And then it lets you double check. That all looks good to me. Hit confirm. Now if I search for Brickstone again, it's going to pop up. See? Now, a cool thing you can do here, because I'm going to enter Keaton Foster as well, who is the owner of Brickstone Farms, you can hit this duplicate button and it will duplicate most of the information you already entered for that contact. So another example of when you might do this is what Mike mentioned, is if you have a tree farmer and maybe the next generation still lives at home, but they're going to be the future tree farmers. Whatever the case may be, maybe your owner and co-owner have the same address, or it's a husband and wife, something like that, where you don't want to re-enter all the same information except for the fact that they're two different people. So when that happens, Brickstone Farms is selected. All I do is I hit duplicate. Oh, never mind. It's not letting me do that. So I guess you can't duplicate an organization for the individual. That's fine. You can if it was like two individuals, though, just know that. I thought you could do like a cross duplication between organization and individual, but that's okay. So we're going to search for Keaton Foster. Nothing. So I'm going to re-enter the information for Keaton Foster now and create him as an individual in the database. So now instead of organization down here, I entered a first name and a last name. Type is person instead of organization. Preferred contact is still email. Primary address. We're going to call it work. The upside here is that when you've been entering stuff, it usually will remember the last thing you entered. So you can see there that Malark Road address pops up for me. So I just got to select it. And then for the zip code, same thing, Bear Lake. And for the work phone, again, that's that last number I entered, so I can just select that. Email, same thing. The last one I entered pops up automatically. Now that we have an individual, it's going to let me select stuff here. So for Keaton, we're just going to put prefer not to say. Same answers down here as it was for Brickstone Farms. And create. So now we have this to look over again and double check for Keaton Foster, who is the owner of Brickstone Farms. So now if I search for Keaton, there he is. Any questions on that? That's what all we've done now is we've created the tree farmers. That's typically the first thing that I do. In fact, you need to do that before you create the tree farm, which is going to be the next step. Everybody clear on that? Any questions, just interrupt me or type something in the chat, whatever you prefer. So now we need to create the tree farm to tie to both Keaton Foster and Brickstone Farms. So for that, we're going to go back to search, create records, and tree farm properties. And for this, you definitely want to select your state. So Michigan. And here's how I like to go about this. I'm going to pull a file up here, and it's going to have a website link to a random number generator. This is something that Katie helped create back when she worked for Martell Forestry. And it's something we've been using ever since. And it generates a number that hasn't been used yet. in the Michigan tree farm number system. So one easy way that I can create a new tree farm is I'll just I'll generate the number first, and then I'll type that number in there knowing that it's nothing's going to pop up, right? And then I'll start to create the tree farm based on that. You don't necessarily have to do that because you've got create new down here already. But for some reason, I like to generate that number right off the bat just to have it ready. So let me pull up a file that Winona gave me. So this is that link. Actually, should automatically connect. So by clicking on that link, the number will pop up. So 9731 is our number. I'll just type that in. And another reason to do it this way is on occasion, I think there are errors where the number does exist. I have not run into that yet, but I think others have. So I type it in just to be safe. So this is the number I generated based on that random number generator, which again was just taking that URL for that Martell Forestry link and putting it in, and it'll automatically generate the number. Let's see what's in the chat box here. Okay, so Matt has run into this. He's had the random number come back as existing. So all the better reason to type that number in when you're just starting out, just to see if it already exists. And it's what I do anyway, so it's a bit of a safety net. So 9731 should not exist in theory in Michigan. And careful up here too, make sure you're selecting Michigan, because if you just leave it as all, then chances are that number does exist elsewhere. So make sure you're selecting Michigan as your state, and then type the number in, and then I'm going to put search. No tree farm exists with that info. You can search again or create a new tree farm below. So we're going to create a new tree farm. Now we're going to create our owners, not create, but link our owners and contacts to the tree farm itself. And I'll show you how I go about this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type in Brickstone. And again, I'll leave it at all states just because I know that's not going to be found in another state. But if you're really certain that it's going to be Michigan because you already created them, right? You can select Michigan down here, but it won't matter in this case. So Brickstone Farms. It's selected here. I'm going to click Add to Owners. And I'm going to click Add to Contacts. So Brickstone is both an owner and a contact. And right now the primary is selected for both because there's only one, right? But I'm also going to put Keaton Foster in here and make sure that I keep Brickstone Farms selected as the primary. That's important. So I'm going to delete this up here, and now I'm going to search for Keaton Foster. In this case, I'll go with Michigan because there might be other Keaton Fosters out there. So now Keaton is displayed right there. Again, I'm going to click Add to Owners and Add to Contacts. I don't think you always have to put all the people as both owners and contacts, but it's an easy way for me to think about it. That's just what I do. When I have multiple people tied to a tree farm, I list them as both owners and contacts, unless I know for sure that, for example, a second contact is like family that lives somewhere else and has no ties to the tree farm currently, but might in the future. Back to like the heirs that Mike mentioned earlier, that would be a case where you would only list the current, like the actual current owner as the owner, and then the other person other than the owner would be a contact as a potential future owner, but currently not the owner. In this case, Keaton is the owner of Brickstone Farms, so I'm listing the organization and the individual as both owners and contacts. And the same would be true of like married couples or couples that are living together, whatever the case might be. If you have multiple individuals tied to a single tree farm and they're both actually there and they both own it, then I put them down as both owners and contacts. You just have to then decide who is the primary owner and who is the primary contact. And I defer to the tree farmers for that. I just say, hey, who is the actual owner if there is just one person listed on the tax bill or whatever it might be, and then who is the main contact? Who should I be communicating with regarding tree farm? And really the inspector should be having that conversation and letting you know as a regional coordinator. So again, I'm leaving Brickstone Farms as the primary owner, and then Brickstone Farms as the primary contact, but Keaton Foster is also tied to this tree farm as a co-owner and a secondary contact. So once that is completed, I hit next. And now we start entering the information for the tree farm itself. Again, I stick to the very basic stuff here. But in this case, because we're entering everything on the database, I am going to type all of this stuff in because we're not using the PDF submission method. So state is Michigan. Hopefully that makes sense what I was saying a few times there, which is if you're going to use the PDF submission method where you're emailing that 021 form to inspectors at forestfoundation.org, there's a lot of stuff in the database at this stage that you can skip because that inspection form that you submit as a PDF will autofill this. But if you're doing everything by entering it in the database, then you're going to need to fill all this out as you're going through it. And that's the way we're going to do the inspection today. So tree farm number 9731 was the number that got generated. So I'm going to type that in. Ownership type. Non-industrial, private, family. I'm actually going to call it other just because it's a known company. A maple syrup company and orchard as well. In addition to the tree farm acres, there's other stuff going on there. So in this case, we'll call it other. I wouldn't split hairs too much over this question. Just make sure you're not calling it some big corporation if it's just a mom and pop landowner. Tree farm name. It's up to you whether you want to type something in for that. I like to, if there's an organization name tied to it, I like to type something in there. Keaton is also getting verified in MEP Forest Wetlands Habitat Assist. So you're required to provide a farm name if you do that, even if it's not a farm. But so in this case, he's going to have everything tied to this name, Brickstone Farms. That stuff you can leave blank for now. Keaton is not part of a landscape management plan, so I'm going to skip that stuff. I have yet to run into this being the case for any landowners I've worked with, participating in a landscape management plan. That hasn't happened with any landowners I've interacted with thus far. So usually this stuff is left blank. I'm going to skip over that. Programs property is enrolled in. Cost share federal is about the only thing that I'm aware of. So for now, we're just going to leave it at that. If that changes, that can always be edited later on. But Keaton is participating in NRCS cost share to do some conservation practices. I hemmed and hawed over whether to spend time on this, and because it's 12:44, I am not going to. But just be aware that you also have the option to draw the polygon here. We get a chat message. Okay, Mike just confirmed what Matt said, that sometimes you get multiple numbers from that random number generated. Thankfully, I have not run into that yet. Every number I've generated on there has been unique, but some of you guys obviously are. So just be mindful of that. If you just type that number in when you're initially doing that search before you create the tree farm, that's the easiest way to figure out if it's already in the database. As far as the GIS stuff, if you want to, you can draw the polygon for the parcel. The way I have been approaching this, Winona and I were actually talking about this earlier and are not entirely sure what American Forest Foundation wants, but because the 021 form has total acres and forested acres, my approach to this when I've been drawing these, when I do initial inspections, is that I draw the entire parcel. I do not just draw the forested acres. My concern with just drawing the forested acres is that it's causing a change in the database for that category called total acres. I don't know as much about that as Winona does. She's done some data exploring on that, but the fact is they give you the option to input total acres and forested acres on the 021 form. Now, that has not been the case in the past. With the 2015 to 2020 standards, you only entered forested acres. Now we're entering total and forested. So total to me means the acreage of the entire ownership. Forested means of that, how much is forested. Mike, you unmuted. It sounds like you got something to add to that.
Well, and this is unfortunate that AFF is kind of creating some chaos and confusion here. We've been dinged on recent audits where we're only certifying forested acres. You know, if it's a 100-acre parcel and it's got 60 acres of soybeans, we're only certifying, 40 acres, not the 100-acre, total parcels. So if anything, that forested acres should be what's required, not the total acres, as you're showing on the database there, because the forested acres should represent the amount of land that's certified. And I'm pretty sure that when Nia and James were trying to digitize all of the existing tree farms, that they were instructed to digitize the forested stands, not the total ownership if it included non-forest land that wasn't certified. Maybe
Nia, you're on
can
here.
confirm that.
Can you, sorry to cut you off there, Mike.
That's good.
Did you have more to add?
Oh, I guess not a whole lot. Sorry, I'm eating a radish right now. I don't remember exactly which one they wanted us to digitize.
Okay.
But I think I agree with your approach, Josh, of digitizing the total acreage, because that's what it, basically when you digitize it, that's what it updates to.
Right. And I think Winona confirmed that too. So if I'm understanding right, the GIS layer I entered 149 acres here, right? If I draw a polygon that is only the forested 48 acres, it's going to change total acres to 48. Am I understanding that right?
Correct, yes.
Which is inaccurate. Otherwise, why would we have a total acres and a forested acres? Why would they want both if they're just both forested acres? That's the part that confuses me. And if anybody has answers on that, fantastic. But there's no point in having two rows like this if they're both just going to be forested. Any thoughts on that? Because I don't know.
Right.
I would just say, don't worry.
Yeah, So yeah, and to build on that, what Winona just said, keep in mind that this is not required. This is being emphasized. But think about this. In my region, a vast majority of the inspections that come my way are because inspectors filled out an 021 PDF form and emailed it to me and said, hey, can you approve this? What that means is that they, as the inspector, are not going on this database to draw that polygon because the PDF option has been given to inspectors, which means you're not even on here looking at this map to draw a polygon. If it was a true requirement, the database should be generating an error if you failed to draw this polygon. And where I've sort of drawn a line in the sand is that I'm not drawing polygons for an entire span of counties from Lake Michigan to Lake Huron for Region 7 during the creation of the tree farm process. So I'm actually glad that it's an optional thing technically, because inspectors who choose to enter their inspection data on a database, or well, actually, is that even an option? Because we're in the create tree farm. All right, I'm gonna defer to Mike and Winona again on this one.
You can go back and change the GIS.
Okay,
Yeah.
as with just regular inspector privileges, correct?
Actually, I have no idea. So
That's that hadn't dawned on me before. Is Mike, do you know? Can you go back and digitize the polygon if you just have regular inspector privileges?
I don't know, But my guess would be that yes, an inspector is allowed to edit records associated with a tree farmer where they were the prior inspector. So I don't know this, but I would guess that an inspector would be allowed to edit information about the tree farm, including spatial information about the tree farm, if they are the prior inspector or the current assigned inspector. So I think they could, but I don't think we should ever ask them to do that. I think this whole spatial data thing's been a giant waste of time.
And one thing I did notice with the spatial data is that if they do have the lat long entered, it will zoom to where basically where that lat long is.
Okay. But we're not sure if regular inspectors have the option. It sounds like they do, according to Mike. I've not encountered this yet. None of the inspectors that I deal with in Region 7 have been drawing these polygons, so it's not a situation that I've had to deal with. And when I have been drawing the polygons, if it's an inspection that I'm doing, I'm also the one creating the tree farm as the regional coordinator. So I absolutely have that privilege. So I'd never thought of that, because right now we're in the create the tree farm process, the screen we're on right now, which is not an option regular inspectors have. Only regional coordinators can do this. But I believe, Mike, what you're saying is accurate, which is they can go in and edit inspection content, which means they ought to be able to edit whatever polygon was drawn or not drawn at all. Hopefully that's the case. Either way, I have not been dealing with the polygons as much as maybe some of you have on this call. So just know that it's not, as it is right now, it's not required. If you choose to do it, great. But what I've chosen not to do is I'm not drawing polygons for all inspections across my whole region. I think that needs to be up to the inspector who's doing the inspection. It's too much busy work. So for total acres, Brickstone Farms is about 149. So I've entered that there because that includes some of his agricultural areas. And then the forested acres is 48. And then I'll enter the rest of this stuff here. So we have county is Manistee, which automatically autofills District 7. For town here, I usually just put the township name, which is Onekama Township. I know there's different ways to interpret that word town. You could put like the name of the town or village if you wanted to. I don't know that there's real clear guidance on that, but that's usually what I'll put. And then for location, because there's a street address here, I'll usually type that in, which is the same address that I entered to create the tree farmers, to create Brickstone and Keaton in the database. And for the legal description, I don't get super complicated with this. I try not to get in the habit of copying and pasting complicated surveyor language, which you can do if you have access to equalization records. I try to keep it simpler than that. So in this case, I just put portion of the southeast 1/4 of section 12. And then the township and range. I'll usually put the name of the township in parentheses. In this case, I'm going to skip lat long, all that stuff. If you want to enter it, great. Like Nia said, it'll link that to a location on the map if you enter it that way. I'll re-enter some of the stuff I entered up here already. The township range. Got another chat message here. All right, just a couple comments by Nia and Mike. Nia says if there's ever another mass, I know you guys can read this. I don't know why I'm reading it to you, but I'll do it anyway. there's ever another mass digitization effort, having a good useful legal is helpful. That's true. What I will say to that, Nia, is like some of the surveyor language, like good luck actually trying to draw something based on how that's written, it can get really, really out of control. When they put a bunch of exceptions in the legal, I would certainly never rely on some of those to be like, I couldn't draw a shape based on some of those. So a lot of times you need plat books or something that gives you a visual of what those look like. And Mike says county, town, range, section, number, and acres are adequate for a bare minimum legal. Oh, Julie corrected me. People watching the recording do not see the chat. It's a good idea to read them. Thanks, Julie. I didn't realize that. Well, good. That's good that I've been reading them there. Okay, so now we're into soil types. So in the case of Brickstone Farms, this I know has confused a couple people. I, again, don't know what would happen if you leave one of these blank. I just haven't been. So if, for example, the entire parcel is sand, which is the case with Brickstone Farms, I just select sand for both. That's how I deal with that. I can't tell you if it would generate an error if you only selected a primary and not a secondary. I just haven't explored that example.
It does. It does. It'll reject the tree farm if you don't have soil types identified. So I just hit loam for both and move on with life.
Okay, so you have to have a primary and a secondary?
Yeah, it wants a soil type in there, even though it doesn't show it as required. I've had, a tree farm rejected because I didn't have soil types identified.
But was that because you had both of them blank or because you left one of them blank?
I'm not certain.
Okay, that's the question, I guess, is if you put a primary in and you leave secondary blank, I don't know if that would generate an error, but because those little nitpicky things, I just don't care to figure out if it would generate an error. I just cover my bases and I enter both no matter what. So if it's all sand, I put sand for both and then move on, like you said, Mike.
Yeah, and why does AFF care about the soil types? Good grief.
I don't know. All right, moving on. So here's tree farm 9731. This is all the basic information. And then we can confirm that. And there it is. So now if I search for it up here, because I already had that number entered when we first started, if you recall. Now when I scroll down and I hit search, it'll actually pop up. And there it is, owners, Brickstone Farm with Keaton Foster. So primary and then secondary. Is everybody clear on creating a tree farmer and a tree farm? Any questions on that? All right. So next is we have to assign the inspection. This is a really critical step. Nothing will work in the database when you do submissions if it hasn't been assigned. So I don't think you need to check this box. I just do it anyway, again, because I don't like to explore like all these what ifs, like what if I don't check something, will it generate an error? I just don't, there's so many of those things that could happen that I just play it safe. I just check the box and be done with it. Then I go over here under assigned inspector and I say assign. And this will automatically pop up. So this drop down is where you search for an inspector name. So in this case, I'm going to assign it to me because I'll do this inspection. Make sure the form version is 2021. That's the only option. I think there was a moment in time where maybe you could select 2015 to 2020 or 21. I don't know if that's true or not, but either way, the form should be 2021 standards. For due date, use your own discretion. I know this is one area where there's a lot of variability in how people feel about this. So I'm going to share how I view this, and that doesn't mean that's like the rule. To me, creating really stringent deadlines, if it's not a required inspection, is not helpful and not better for the spirit of tree farm. And I say that only speaking for the landowners and inspectors I deal with, but unless the landowner and or the inspector is like really, really passionate about wanting to get this done right away, I don't see the need to put like super stringent deadlines in for them as long as they get certified under the current standards. The exception to that rule is if it got pulled as a required inspection from national. We need to get on those obviously and get those knocked out in a timely manner so that we adhere to those requirements. The same with audits, right? We want to get on those and make sure that we're doing those properly because there are strict deadlines for those. But if it's something like this one, let's see what's in the chat. Somebody said something. So Mike says for required and optional, he usually puts a deadline in for December 1st for a given year. And that's fair. I definitely do that, Mike, for the requireds. So I had one required in Region 7 for 2023, just the one. And I talked with Larry Celesta, who was the last inspector, and he's going to do it. And for sake of logistics for the due date, I just put in either the last day of November or December 1st, because that's plenty of time. And it's also enough time to meet the deadline to get all of our requireds done, which the true deadline is sometime in December, I believe. But if it's one like Keaton Foster, like the one we're doing right now, this has absolutely nothing to do with required inspections. It didn't get pulled for an audit. None of that happened. For me, you can just choose what makes sense for the inspector and the landowner. Personally, I think a good system to have in place would simply be some sort of mass communication to all tree farmers, something efficient. I'm not claiming I have a great solution, but something that would notify everybody that, hey, the new standards are coming out. You need to get certified before the end of the new standards, or you're not in this. Whether that means drop them to Pioneer or decertifying, there's a big debate to be had there, I suppose. But to me, if they're not required inspections or audit inspections, I don't see any reason to be in a huge rush, because in my experience, the landowners don't care about that as much as people running the programs. So, and if they're doing great work, I would hate for landowners to leave the program all because of an arbitrary deadline that was set for them. Winona indicates inspections are accepted after the due date. You don't have to change the date if an inspection comes in late. That's a good point, Winona. So yeah, if I was to set a date here and I just didn't get it done in time, I could submit it later is what Winona is saying. I don't have to go back in and change this due date. Thanks for that, Winona. That's a good point. So for the due date here, I'm just going to put next week. I mean, I'm doing this today, but actually I'll put the end of March because it really doesn't matter in this case. I'm picking something that makes sense. And because I'm the inspector, I'm deciding that. So once you've picked your inspector and then your due date, you just hit assign and then confirm. And now if you hit search again, it'll update and you'll see that I'm the assigned inspector. So now the tree farm has been created. The tree farm has been created. The inspection has been assigned. If the scenario that was presented to you was this, which is somebody filled all this out before we did all the stuff we just did in the database, the solution is really easy. You take that same inspection form, you put the tree farm number up there. I think it's 9731, right? Yep. You just enter that. Make sure this information down here is completed. And it should be, except for the state approval part. So that whatever inspector kicked this your way should have gotten permission to sign the landowner's name as an electronic signature here. And then also enter the inspector information, including their inspector number. And then I, as a regional coordinator, would just fill in the approval here. So my name, the date, and then the certification button. Something I've been seeing here under landowner signature. I don't know if you guys have been running into this, but it's a problem I've seen every now and again, which is don't overcomplicate this. Do not put those special PDF signatures in here. This needs to be a straight up fillable PDF form to work if you're going to submit it to the database. So all you're doing here is typing the name. That's all you're doing to sign the landowner's name. Nothing fancy, no like picking the signature thing up here and putting that fancy cursive in. You have to just type the name, type the date, check the box. That's all you're doing for that signature. I've had a couple inspections come in where it was a fancier version of how it got signed and the database rejected it. So just remember with these PDF methods, you're literally just making sure that you maintain the fillable PDF format of the file, and that all you're doing in this form is typing stuff into the boxes. You're not doing anything fancier than that because the database will freak out if you try to get too fancy. So just know that. Typing the names, that's all we're doing here. That serves as the signatures. So again, if I was to submit this using the PDF method, because it had already been given to me before I did the database stuff, I just type that tree farm number in up here and make sure all the signatures are in place, and then make sure all the content is completed. And then email this PDF to inspectors@forestfoundation.org with the subject line upload 021. And that's in multiple guidance documents that you guys already have. So it's 107. I'm going to defer to the group here. And then Mike and Winona, if you want to chime in and give your thoughts. Do you guys want to go through this inspection during this recorded session, or is this adequate to know what you need to do as regional coordinators? Because the two ways we do the inspection are either to enter the data directly onto this database, or take this PDF file and email it to inspectors@forestfoundation.org. But I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts, because again, we're at 107. So we're almost an hour and 10 minutes into this.
Yeah, I've done it both ways. I like working in the database, but I prefer to work in the database if I was the inspector. And quite frankly, I really like the PDF because I think that PDF is something that should be printed out and given as a hard copy to tree farmers as a record of the inspection for their records. And, we've discussed before that the 021 form might be the best addendum to a management plan because it goes over all the, required elements in the standards. So I think that, having a hard copy is good for the inspector, for the tree farmer. It's easy for us to work with, for submitting data to national. So working with the PDF is my preferred way of entering inspections in the database.
Okay. But any thoughts on whether you guys want to go through an inspection right now? Who's game, who's not? You can always bail if you're not, but
Can you email that PDF to the database and show people the acceptance or rejection email you get back?
yeah, is that the way we want to do it? I was going to enter the data on the database and show people that way, but I guess I'm looking for some feedback from the group. How would you guys prefer to do this? Not go through the inspection at all, for me to email it, or for me to enter it in the database? Because I can do any of those three things. If you don't need a training on how to do an inspection, then we can stop. Or we can use either the PDF method or the direct data entry method. So what do you guys think? Why don't some of you chime in and let me know what your thoughts are?
Josh, could you maybe review your inspection as if you received it for the first time, and then maybe show the email upload?
Okay, so go through the PDF file
Yes.
and review it real quick, and then all right, perfect. So let's do that. And the other file I'm going to pull up as I do this for all you guys to look at is this resource document that I update each year. Let me pull that up. So the last time I made an update to this was October of 2022. So this, Mike, this got emailed out, right? You emailed this out as part of one of your many emails and you put it on the website. Is that correct?
I believe so, and I think this October version is on the treefarmsystem.org/Michigan.
Okay, I would encourage you guys to utilize this for like different resources just to answer the standards. What I tried to do here was organize these resources in the same numerical order as the standards in the form, but also provide website links to different things to help answer the questions, and then also differentiate between what's required and what actually is not. So separating those shalls from the shoulds, because I think that's sometimes getting forgotten about, which is there's a difference between shall and should with tree farm inspections. You have to be meeting the shalls. Shoulds are great if you're doing it, but not absolutely required. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's how I set this up. The table follows the standards in the same order. So let's go through this. And I can just point out what it is I look for. If, again, let's pretend somebody else sent me this PDF and I did not fill it out, but I'm a regional coordinator looking at this and deciding if this meets the standards or not. Obviously, I make sure all the demographic stuff up here and the background information is filled in, which is what we filled in when we created the tree farm and the tree farmer, because you have to have a lot of this to even create the tree farm and the tree farmer. So you want to make sure that this is all filled in, whether it's a person or an organization as the primary contact, whether there's a co-owner, looking for things like mailing address, phone numbers, emails, et cetera, et cetera. And then some of these questions you just have to answer, or the database will kick it back. Now, I can't tell you for sure if everything in red has to be answered. I think the red is a little bit deceiving on this form, but I just do it anyway. For example, I'm pretty sure you can leave out an email and you'll be okay, even though it's highlighted in red. But I complete as much of this as I can. But some of these that have the red, you definitely have to answer. And even this one, I believe I've gotten a database error in the past because this block got left blank, which is how did the landowner hear about ATFS? I'm pretty sure I got an error due to that quite recently, actually. So my advice on this is make sure just fill in as much as you possibly can. So if the inspector left some things out, communicate with that inspector and say, hey, can you answer this question? How did the landowner learn about ATFS? Maybe that's a quick phone call. Maybe you already know because you know the landowner. It was a referral of yours as a district forester. Who knows? But complete as much as you possibly can is my advice, because the worst thing that can happen with this PDF method is you get like a constant barrage of database errors when you try to send it in because you're just not filling out everything. So be as detailed oriented as possible on these is my advice. Some of this we already answered. Again, is the landowner in the following participating in any of these activities? I talked about invasive species management. We talked about NRCS cost share for this question. The landowner is not part of a landscape management plan. What I did here is I did list landowner objectives. I know I didn't type these in when we were doing this on the database, but I did type them in here along with recommendations. So following NRCS job sheets associated with EQIP and CSP, and then following recommendations that I added in the plan addendum. These are the signature blocks down here. So now we're into the actual standards. So 1.1, do they have a plan? That's a pretty basic question, right? The rest of ones are tied to this bigger picture. 1.1 is, do they have a plan? They should have a plan of some sort. I can tell you, Keaton Foster, this is an outside the box plan, if you want to call it that. This is not like a traditional forest management plan that would have been written by a consultant or a industry private sector forester. This, because of the landowner's goals, his plan is actually a combination of NRCS conservation plans, job sheets, and then an addendum that I wrote. The compilation of those documents are collectively considered the management plan for Brickstone Farms. And I believe that should be okay. I ran it by a few other people on this committee. So that is Keaton's management plan. And what you're looking for in this section is, does the plan have these different components that are being listed here? So is it adaptive, for example? Does it have the current forest conditions? It should always have objectives, things like that, right? Does it have accurate maps? These are all basic management plan components. And then 1.12b, does it demonstrate consideration for the following resource elements? And these get a deeper dive later in the standards, but forest health, soil, water, wood and fiber, threatened and endangered species, special sites, invasive species, forests of recognized importance, those all need to be addressed. And then additional components here under Part C, fire, wetlands, desired species, recreation, conversion, etc. And if you look on the resource document, 1.1 all the way through, well, components of 1.1 are shells, whereas other components are shoulds. So that's where this document hopefully can be helpful to you guys, is you've got some shoulds mixing in with shells under standard 1. You see? Interrupt me anytime, by the way, if you guys want to dwell on a particular topic as we're going through these, because I know some have a little bit more of a gray area than others. Some of these are really straightforward. So standard 2 is just, are they following the laws? Can you possibly know every forestry law out there? Of course not, but there's a pretty basic list of well-known ones. And if you refer to the back of this resource document, you know, I had a lot of help from Mike on this. Mike did a great job of putting together a list of laws way back when. And I took some of that and built on it. But I have federal laws, state laws, and then just a reference to local laws and ordinances by county and township. Sometimes you're dealing with that, like setback distances that are township specific along a stream or a river. And then best management practices that are beyond the law. So there's a reference to that in the back of this resource document. And there, whenever possible, I put website links in to direct you to more information on each of those laws. So again, federal laws, state laws, just a statement about local laws, and then some information about best management practices that are not necessarily law. All right, Matt's got to check out. Yeah, thanks, Matt. And this is recorded. So again, this will be available for people to reference. So that's all standard 2 is. Laws, regulations, ordinances. And then there's a question in there about, did they obtain appropriate advice? So did they work with qualified professionals? That's the gist of 2.12. Standard 3 is about reforestation and afforestation. So typically with these standards, it will date back. I think 5 years is pretty common. I think the 2015 to 2020 standards reference 2010 for this question. And now the new standards reference 2015. So basically what has happened since 2015? Sometimes the answer is no, like nothing has really taken place, in which case you skip to the next standard. And if you check no for this box, you don't have to answer any of these other questions. In this case, I checked yes. So Keaton with Brickstone worked with a sawmill to take down some of the hybrid poplar that he has on the property, in addition to doing some harvesting of some veneer sugar maple. So what I put for 3.11 is for regeneration type natural, because it wasn't a tree planting. It wasn't a project where he specifically planted trees and protected them from deer, etc. It was releasing some growing space for established sugar maple seedlings and saplings to expand, as well as some other species. Like there's black cherry, there's several other species mixing in that particular forest that has responded to the removal of some of that veneer maple. And that was on approximately 12 acres of the forest. So I put natural for regeneration type, 12 acres, sugar maple and other deciduous species. And I put 2020 because that's when the harvest took place. Hopefully that all makes sense. Another common row you might have in here to look for is if some sort of tree planting did take place. And that's quite common with with these tree farm inspections. So if they got NRCS cost share to do some planting, or if they paid for it on their own, you want to put in this part artificial, for example, and then the number of acres that got planted, and then the species that got planted. Standard 4, this is in reference to the BMP manual, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, or you should be. If not, I don't recall if Ben Schramm handed hard copies of these out at the FAP camp this past summer. I thought he did, but I can't remember. I know that I have one, but that is this manual here. Michigan Forestry Best Management Practices for Soil and Water Quality. This has a lot of good information in it, including information about some of the laws that were listed in that resource document that I showed you. So this is the BMP manual for Michigan, the forestry BMP manual. And that's what they're referencing here, state forestry BMPs that are applicable to the property. So stuff to look for on the ground would be erosion issues, excessive rutting, particularly near water bodies and in wetlands. So my caveat on this is something that I think people get caught up in is when are ruts really an issue, right? So the way I look at it is I try to take a bigger picture look at the area. So if there's a couple ruts here and there on a 2-track or whatever, you know, what is the issue that could be resulting from that? If there's a cold water trout stream nearby and there's obvious erosion spilling into that, causing excessive sedimentation, which is influencing macroinvertebrate habitat and spawning habitat, then yes, that's a problem. But you kind of got to gauge like what is really an issue from what is not necessarily an issue or something that could be fixed really quick. So if it's a flat area that has a couple little divots here and there, not something to be too concerned about. And if you really want to do a deep dive into some of those calculations about rutting and whatnot, that BMP manual has a couple guidelines listed in terms of how many inches of rut is acceptable for how many linear feet, for example. So you can always dig into that manual to get that info. But I also try to take a common sense approach to that, which is like, is this even an issue? And why? So landowner considers a range of activities to control pests, pathogens, and unwanted vegetation. That's a pretty straightforward question. And that transitions into the next one, which is, have pesticides been used? A lot of times you might get a no to this answer to this question, in which case you skip to the prescribed fire section. If the answer is yes, then you want to make sure that there's at least some conversation being had about integrated pest management. Is the pesticide being used properly for the type of pest that is being dealt with? And of course, the EPA label is the law. That's a federal law. So the storage recommendations or requirements rather, and everything else, the mixture rates, the maximum amount that can be applied per acre, all that stuff that is on that label on a pesticide container is to be interpreted as a federal law. So going in excess of so many pounds of a certain chemical per acre, for example, like a triclopyr, you're violating a federal law by doing that. So just making sure that they understand that the EPA label is the law is important. And that has to do with storage as well. You can only store some of these chemicals in certain conditions per the temperature ranges listed on that label. So I just have a note here indicating that pesticides are applied by James Scarlatta, who's a local contractor, and he's a certified and licensed pesticide applicator in Michigan. So that's who Keaton is working with to do these treatments for tree of heaven, black locust, invasive shrubs. He's hired this out to a qualified contractor who carries all the proper paperwork. So all right, Mike says move it along instead of focusing on content. All right. Mike, chime in and tell me what it is you want me to focus on here as far as filling it out correctly.
Well, just anything's on the PDF where if it's left blank, it's going to kick back to you. You know, those types of procedural things to look out for.
Okay, well, there's that, and then there's also stuff that we have according to like the Michigan committee guidance, right? Some of these I don't know, like what if you leave it blank, if it will generate an error, because like I said, I haven't explored all those options. All I can tell you is fill all the questions out to what you're saying, Mike, fill them all out. There's not a whole lot on here you can leave blank. Some of the stuff that you can obviously leave blank would be the example I just gave, which is if you selected no for pesticides, you don't have to fill these sub questions out. I don't think it would even let you. And then you skip to prescribed fire. And for prescribed fire, no is the answer to this one anyway, for this particular tree farm. But stuff down here, for example, that will not generate a database error, but that we require as a state committee, and technically, if you read the national standards, you're supposed to be doing it this way as well, would be on the threatened and endangered species question. We have to have proper resources cited here.
Yeah,
So-
the database should kick it back if that blank is not filled in.
Which may be the case, but you can fill in information that isn't proper for how we do inspections and it won't kick it back. You see what I'm saying?
True, it's not checking it for correct information,
Yep.
but I believe the database is looking for some answer there as far as what resources were consulted.
Okay, and that could be the case. I don't recall dealing with that in the recent past, but what I will say on this one is if you select yes here, which you should be selecting yes, what's filled in here matters. So as a regional coordinator, you want to look for a reference to a database, not just because my forester went out and didn't see anything. That, in my opinion, and you guys can chime in if you feel differently, but based on the guidance we have at the state level and even what the national says about making sure you're referencing a state database if one exists, you cannot just write, I went and walked the woods and I didn't see any threatened or endangered species. Of course, you should walk the property and look for them, but what we're really looking for here, in addition to that, is a database such as the Michigan Natural Features Inventory. Does that make sense?
I'm following along with a different 021 form, and the person listed consulting forester and T&E species database. Is that specific enough just to say threatened and endangered species database, or?
I think so. I don't think it needs to say Michigan Natural Features Inventory. That's the database I used. And that's the database that they should have used if they're using that phrase. I just try to call it what it is. But I also get inspectors that submit inspections that will say state databases, right? I think that's adequate because they're using the phrase database. Because honestly, there aren't other databases I know of. There are two main ones in Michigan you can reference. One is actually federal. It's called IPAC. You can do a search for federal species and by defining your project area and all this other stuff. And then there's the MNFI, Michigan Natural Features Inventory. If you're looking for a true database, check on T&E. So Julie, I think if they're saying something like that, I would accept that as a regional coordinator. I think that's fine.
Thank you.
So that would be an example of Mike. I'm sure you're right that it will kick it back if it's blank, but you also need to look for information that, isn't quite up to what we are looking for, like would it pass an audit, for example. Hopefully that makes sense.
And I would
So-
also say, Josh, sorry, because most foresters don't have access to the full-on inventory that if they mention, like talking with a state forester, that would also be acceptable.
Yeah, and that's in this resource document. So 5.11, which is a shell, by the way, doing this database check and addressing this question, that's a shell, which means it's required. I make reference to that in this resource guide, which is contact your local DNR service forester. That would be Mike, and you're all of Southern Michigan, correct, Mike?
Yeah, Southern Lower. Mike Anley, the Northern Lower. Jason Karen is the new East UP Service Forester, and Gary Willis is the West UP Service Forester.
Okay. So yeah, get the information for your local DNR service forester, and all you need to do is email them a legal description and say, can I get a T&E check and an ARCI check? And we'll get into that in a little bit. Actually, that might be coming up. So it's that easy. If you don't have an MNFI login, I actually have one. I was able to get one. It wasn't that hard, by the way. I think some folks have made that sound harder than what it is, but yeah, we all got MNFI logins here at our office. Hopefully I won't get in trouble for saying that in a recorded session, but anyway, I just use my own login now. So nothing flagged for T&E. The other thing to watch for here as regional coordinators, because if you, or just as doing a regular inspection, is if you send a request into a DNR service forester, Mike, I don't know how you get the information back to people, but when Mike Hanley does it, for example, he will just list everything that came up as a hit. The thing you have to watch for is that MNFI hits are also going to generate special concern species, which are not T&E technically. So I would encourage you to, at least become familiar with the MNFI website, because you don't need a login to at least look up species, but know that some stuff that your service foresters are going to kick back at you as a listed species might just be special concern and not T&E, and special concern species standalone are not afforded legal protection. That's a common mistake I actually see quite a bit. So certain turtles come up that are special concern, but they're not threatened or endangered. Technically, they're not designated as T&E for this question. They're rare, but they're not T&E, and they're not legally protected. They're just close to being that is all. Hopefully that makes sense. Desired species, just make sure you check something here. And if so, this can be a no, by the way. They can check no, and then you go on to the next. But if they check yes, you have to select something here. And I found that other comes up a lot because we've sort of been spoon-fed these habitat types on the new form, and a lot of habitats don't fall within these categories. So you'll see other quite a bit. Forest health is the next section. This is all related to desired species up here if they checked yes. Forest health, you need to answer that question, obviously. And then the question about are they making efforts to address forest health, and then you just check which issues are relevant to the property. This one over here only applies if they checked yes to wildfire, and I have seen that happen. I think, Mike, to address one of your questions, I think this might generate a database error if you check wildfire over here and then you don't address these questions over here. I think it might kick it back to you. I'm not 100% sure, but if they're calling wildfire a concern, then you also have to answer these questions over here.
Yeah,
That's my understanding.
I've never seen wildfire, included on an 021 form, so I don't know that. And my guess here is that AFF is trying to collect data to show that they're relevant to, federal funding regarding wildfire reduction.
It could be. I've had
That's
this
not in the
checked.
standards.
Yeah, it's I've had a few inspections where this was checked because of the biomass from oak decline, for example, leading to a lot of coarse and fine fuels. So there have been a few inspections that have come in where this was checked, but the inspector thankfully automatically filled some of this out. So I don't know what would happen if you left this blank, if you checked wildfire over here. Again, my opinion is just be thorough. If you check wildfire, you should be answering these questions anyway. There's no reason to leave these blank. So don't explore this example of, well, will the database kick it back to me? If you check it here, address it over here, because that's how the questions are worded. This is just a description of how Keaton is dealing with the forest health issues. So I won't dive too hard into that. Here's another one that's content based. So you need to type something in here for forest of recognized importance. But I am noticing that a lot of people are not looking at our definition. So that's a common error that I do see. And our definition is specifically listed. Where did I put it? Right here. So if you guys just reference that resource document and you want to know whether the tree farm is a 4E, this is it. This is the state specific definition. And honestly, it doesn't ultimately change management a whole lot. Whatever management is being done is likely going to happen the way it was written, whether it's designated a 4E or not. It's just, this is a designation. Like, is it special because of the 4E characteristics? And again, this is the list. Probably one of the more common errors I see on this one is if somebody acknowledged a threatened and endangered species. So they checked yes for that higher up in the standards, and then they did not define this as a 4E. If you look close here, a 4E, one of the criterion is that it's providing habitat for threatened or endangered species. So if you checked yes for T&E and listed some things on that standard, you should also be checking yes for 4E because of the habitat that it's providing. That's how I've been approaching this, unless you have a really strong argument otherwise, which is, well, maybe there's T&E there, but this doesn't provide habitat. Well, true, but then you should probably be reevaluating whether you checked yes for T&E or not. If you checked yes for T&E, you're acknowledging that they're utilizing the parcel based on some shred of evidence. Mike, you unmuted. Did you have something to add?
Well, and one nuance to the threatened and endangered species is if the forest is required habitat for that T&E species, and if habitat loss is what's driving, the loss of that, species. For instance, we wouldn't say that the entire Upper Peninsula is a 4E because a wolf might pass through there at some point. We were really trying to, narrow it down to, what is a forest type that is required habitat for a T&E species. Classic one was like jack pine for Kirtland warbler, which has since been delisted, but that type of, habitat, that forest type required habitat for that species.
Sure. And maybe we need to reword some of this moving forward to make some of that more clear. What I will say is that if there's strong enough evidence to check yes for the T&E in that standard, then one might argue that because of the rarity of a T&E species in general, then that parcel is providing some of that required habitat. You know what I mean? Like, they've been documented. Red-shouldered hawks are documented on the land, and it's happened, let's say, quite recently. Well, that is habitat that's being utilized by them. And because they're rare, I would argue that's a 4E. But there's room for interpretation here, for sure. These are just the other criteria. So just make sure you're referencing it. The other one I see that gets missed a lot is if the parcel is found along a wild and scenic river or a state natural river, that automatically makes it a 4E. So that's one that I've had to correct a few times by looking at inspections. Forest aesthetics, that's a pretty straightforward one. Visual impacts, the reference for that is in another document that I've linked in this resource document, which is this these general accepted forest management practices. There's a whole table of visual sensitivity in that document. That's really our reference, because that's tied to the Right to Forest Act that was passed. So you can do a deep dive into that if you want. There's a 25-pager with the table of visual sensitivity. The main take-home message is if proper silviculture is being matched to that forest type, then there should be no issues with visual sensitivity, because the argument is that that's the proper way to manage. There's more than one proper way, obviously, for many forest types and lots of different ways. There's not like black and white A versus B. However, you have to be doing some pretty egregious things, in my opinion, to not be in compliance with these GAFMs. Special sites. There are the legal sites and then the non-legal sites, right? So what we ask is for some sort of archaeological database check to be done. And DNR service foresters have access to, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, it's down to the 640 acre section, correct? That's your finest resolution on ARCI data?
That's correct.
So you can just contact your service forester and you can knock out the ARCI check and the T&E check in one email. Say, here's the legal description. It's Mike Hanley in this part of the state. I did have to email Mike for the ARCI check because you can't get an individual login to that. And I just said, hey, Mike, here's the legal descript. I'm doing tree farm and MEP with this person. Can you tell me if there are any ARCI hits? And the answer was no. If the answer is yes, then the best thing you can do is take it to the next level, which is contact Stacy, who used to be with State Historic Preservation Office, but now she's with DNR as the state archaeologist, and reach out to her and see if she has any additional details about the specific parcel. This is where it gets a little bit gray, because the best you can do on this is your due diligence to make sure that an effort has been made to get the information. If there's like a huge time lag and somebody actually getting somebody the information, then to me, that's no reason to prevent them from being tree farm certified, because you did your part as the landowner, as the inspector, and as the regional coordinator. That's how I view it. You know, we did our best because we don't want these historic sites destroyed, obviously, but you can certify a tree farm, and Winona might correct me if I'm wrong. You can still certify a tree farm if you haven't gotten a complete answer from the state archaeologist, because the standard is really was an effort being made. Would you guys agree with that?
I would certify it before I heard back from Stacy Trinsky, yes.
Okay. The other thing that could fall under this special site question, so there's the ARCI sites, and then there are these unique natural community sites. This is another area where you have to be careful when you send an email to the service forester, because if you do a Michigan Natural Features Inventory check, it's going to give you a list of threatened, endangered, and special concerned species, right? And I already mentioned that special concern is not the same as threatened or endangered. Well, likewise, rare habitats based on the database search is going to generate S1, S2, and S3 habitats. And we've decided at the state level for tree farm that only S1s and S2s are considered truly unique from this natural community standpoint. So what that means is sometimes you might get an email back from Mike Smulligan or Mike Hanley that says these are the community types that were generated when I did the database check. Well, a lot of times those are going to end up being S3s. So you still would not call that a special site unless you look it up and find out that it's a S1 or a S2. That's why I say get familiar with the MNFI database so that you can do your own homework on like what these different community types are and what these different species are. Because anytime you look up a species or a community type on MNFI without having to log in, you can just look up the different species and community types. It will tell you what the global and state designations are, and the federal and state designations for T&E. So make sure you know if it's truly an S1 or an S2. So don't call it a special site if it's just an S3. Hopefully that makes sense. But S3s will pop out of that database check that the service foresters do. If you do have special sites, you just want to document it in this part. There are none on Keaton's. So, and the landowner can designate them too. This is not just legal stuff or rare community stuff. Sometimes the landowner has like a pet cemetery or something like that that they want to designate, and that's where you would input this information. The last part is pretty easy, actually. It's just a mix of questions regarding the use of professionals, as well as the monitoring of activities. I had to kind of look at 8.2 versus 8.1 here. So yeah, 8.1, do they seek qualified natural resource professionals, qualified contractors? Do these people have insurance, et cetera, et cetera? Do they retain appropriate records? This is all just record keeping, and are you monitoring what's actually going on your land, which is all important stuff. And then is the actual activities being done in compliance with the landowner's goals? That's the very last question, a very important one as well. And you'll see if you scroll down to the bottom that some portions of 8 are shoulds and some are shalls. So again, make sure you're referencing this resource document to understand like the difference between the shalls and the shoulds. Shalls have to be met. You have to meet these for 8.2 and 8.21. A should is like, that's great if you're doing it, but you're not going to not be certified if you're not doing some of these things. Hopefully that makes sense. That's why I really tried to split the shoulds from the shalls on this, because you have to go to the raw standards, the actual detailed standard document to find out which ones are shoulds and shalls, other than that resource document here, because the 021 form itself does not tell you what is a should and what's a shall. That's where it can get a little bit confusing. That's why I tried to make the resource document clear about what the shoulds and the shalls are in these. Shalls have to be met, shoulds should be met, but are not absolutely required. That's all I got. What did I miss? What should we discuss, or what? I don't know. What do you guys think? Mike, Winona, are there other things that we didn't cover that you guys want to bring up?
Do a quick demo of emailing this from
Oh,
your
yeah.
email to forestfoundation.org, and let's see if you can get a quick response back on an email.
I can tell you I did one the other night and it took like 20 minutes. I hope that doesn't happen again, but I guess I'll save it. All right. You guys can read all my emails. You guys can all see this hopefully. So I'm typing in upload 021 in the subject line. And then I'm sending it to inspectors@forestfoundation.org. And then I'm attaching the inspection form.
I've never included the parentheses on the upload 021, so that still works.
Let me make sure I'm not messing that up. Yeah, I always put those in. It always works. All right. So now what I do, this is the waiting game. So if you guys utilize that method, you're going to want to go to inspections over here and then view, edit, submit inspections. And then type the tree farm number in. And you'll see the status. So right now the status is assigned, right? I sent the email to inspectors@forestfoundation.org. And then if I have the time to twiddle my thumbs and wait for this, I'll sit there and just keep refreshing. I usually will just like go do some other work and then come back to this and hit search again. But every time you hit search, it'll refresh. And you'll know that the database accepted the inspection when this inspection status changes from assigned to submitted. And I'm hoping this does happen in the next couple of minutes because there's another step after that to get it changed from submitted to certified. Now that regional coordinators have state privileges to certify them in their own region. So you actually have to go into the database and do one more thing once it's in submitted status. Hopefully I didn't screw anything up on the form. What's your statute of limitations on this, Mike and Winona, waiting for this to change?
Let's not wait around. I think that shows the principle, it hasn't come through into my email either. So let's not wait around for the database to kick it back. I think that illustrates the process.
It's been weird lately. Like I said, the other night I sent one in and there was nothing wrong with it and it didn't kick it back, but it literally took 20 to 30 minutes for it to accept and change to submitted. I don't have an explanation for that. There it is. Never mind. It's submitted. So
What happens if it's not accepted?
what's that?
What happens if it kicks it back? Do you get an email back or does it show in the database?
You do get an email back, and then in the inspection status in the database will remain at assigned. So nothing will change here in the database, but if there's an error because something was wrong when you emailed the PDF, it will kick it back to you, to your email. Whoever submitted it will get an email, and then usually it'll line item the issues in the inspection that you need to fix. So sometimes it's a little tough to interpret, but a lot of times it's pretty clear where the form was wrong. It'll say like you need to complete standard 5.1, whatever, like you didn't answer this question. It'll do a pretty good job of detailing what it is you need to fix in the form. So now that it's submitted, all I do now is go to next. And this is what you have to do as a regional coordinator to make sure that it's approved at the state level. I just skip over this stuff. I keep hitting next. Next. And then I hit submit as approved. The purpose of going through all that other stuff, if you want to, is just to do like one last double check. So you see when I did the PDF submission, all the stuff in the database auto-filled. What I was referring to earlier is you can enter all that directly in the database as an inspector once it's assigned. You can go in and enter that directly by typing it into the database. That is what some people prefer. I like the PDF method personally, but regardless of how you do it, once it goes from assigned status to submitted status, you have to do this one extra step, which is, hit those next buttons a few times and then hit submit as approved. And then it'll ask you another question. Submit inspection as approved, hit yes. Then hit OK. Now, if I go back here and I search for this again, it already tells you here, but I'm just going to hit search again. Now you have one more change that happened. You see how it says approved now? That means you're good to go. So this status changed from assigned to submitted to approved when I completed the last step. So if this does not say approved, then something went wrong. That's one way to check yourself, is go over here under inspections and then view, edit, submit inspections. Type in the tree farm number for the tree farm you're looking for. And if everything was done right and you approved it, it should say approved right here. That means it's certified. And the status here also says certified. Certified and approved. Those are your keywords you're looking for. Does that all make sense?
So this is what the process looks like if the inspector themselves submits the form and then we get the email saying they've submitted it, then we go in our region. Is that right?
Say it again, Sarah, you broke up a little.
So when the inspector submits the form themselves, then we get the email saying they submitted it. And that's when we go into the database and we process to approve it.
If you're saying if they emailed the PDF,
Yeah.
if they emailed the PDF and they didn't get an error message kicking back to them,
Right.
then the status will change to submitted. And then everybody, and I don't know who everybody is technically, but I think all committee members and then additional few people will get an email in their inbox. So you guys should have all gotten an email that says Keaton Foster needs to be approved. If you check your email, Mike, you had yours open. Did you get that once it changed to submitted?
Yes, I did. I did get that email notification.
So I think that's what you're asking, Sarah, right? So if, let's say an inspector, like you assigned it to an inspector and they went and did the PDF on their own on some unknown date and you have no idea, right? And then all of a sudden they email it to inspectors@forestfoundation.org. If they did it correctly, as soon as the status changes to submitted, an email will come to your inbox that says this inspection is awaiting approval. Like
Yeah.
we all get all those emails. Like I get all the ones you guys do in the UP and I just ignore the ones that are not in my region.
Okay, so if it's in our region, once we get that email, then we go into the database and.
Yep, you got it. So
Okay.
yep, you just go in the database and search for it by tree farm number because the tree farm number will be in that email you get.
Mhm.
And then you go through and if it's one you've never had your eyes on before, then that's when you want to stop and make sure you're taking a look at all the content that they put in the inspection and make sure there's nothing to fix.
Thank you.
I guess on that point, Josh, so we get the email saying, oh, there's something ready to be approved, but the inspector does not. So it's always a courtesy to let them know that the inspection's been received and that you're approving it and that that tree farmer is actually a tree farmer now. But of course, they could look in the database themselves to see.
Good point. So again, you guys all have to find what works for you and your regions, but I do exactly what Winona just said, which is every single one that comes across my way in Region 7, I will email the inspector and let them know when it's certified, or I will email them if they have things to fix before I can certify it. But I always send an email. I never leave that as like an unknown because some of them are still not clear on how to submit their payment vouchers. So sometimes if I think they're kind of newer, I'll also give them that payment voucher form to send to Julie and let them know that, hey, the tree farm is certified. You can now request your payment voucher. And then I also just make sure they're aware that you can put a sign up now. And hey, do you need signs? And if they do, then we figure out how to make that work. But they will always get an email from me as a follow-up once that tree farm is certified or if they have things they have to fix. So I found that that works pretty well and they appreciate the communication. So that's my approach. Thanks for bringing that up, Winona. That's a really good point. Other questions, comments, stuff that we didn't cover that maybe you'd like to discuss?
Hey, Josh, can you go over to search inspections and look for all the inspections that need to be under review and approve? Can you look on review and approve for the whole state?
For the whole state?
Yep, whole state.
So I don't click on
Yep.
anything.
Correct, just hit search.
Oh, and keep it under submitted, right?
Sure, let's see what we got out there.
There's a few. Yeah, Hunter kicked a few over.
So
I don't
this
know
list
who's-
doesn't really show the region on there. So I guess a regional coordinator would have to know, hey, is Mecosta County in my neighborhood? Go in there and review and approve those.
Yeah, or
You know,
just if
Any
the
state
regional,
administrator could, Winona could, I could, but then any regional coordinator can, be doing it for their region.
yeah, like I could search for 7, right? Like, are there any pending submitted inspections for Region 7? I just clicked 7. None. So yeah, you can do it.
Pick another number then.
Throw a dart. Tell me a number.
3.
3? So just 2 that are pending for Region 3.
Cool, thank you.
I think you might be able to get at that same information under tree farm reports as well, right?
I'm not sure. I don't usually go in under reports, if I have to go in and review an inspection, I go in through that review and approve inspection area.
Yeah, that's probably the easiest place, but you can probably get at it over here too. It's just this additional feature is just for the regional coordinators and other, I don't know who all has that privilege, but not the average inspector. So I think there's probably some overlap here. But yeah, good good request, Mike. Yeah, generating a list of pending submitted inspections for your region. There's a good place to do it. What else? Anything? We're at 2 hours, so.
I guess I would just add that um, it's easier to correct things before it's all wrapped up and certified in the database. So if there's a question on something, just try to get an answer beforehand. Unless it's something that's like really lengthy, like the historic stuff. So yeah, if you're, I guess, waiting on a couple things that you're not sure of, just wait. Because otherwise to go back and like fix something, sometimes it's more difficult than it should be.
Good point. Well, is that it?
No one else has any further questions? Yeah, I guess we can wrap it up.
Very helpful though, Josh. Thank you for taking the time, and Mike for hosting, and Winona for setting it up.
Yeah,
Very
hey,
helpful.
our pleasure. Hopefully it's helpful to all you guys. And anybody can reach out and ask questions. We're all here to lean on each other and help each other. So some of the newer regional coordinators, don't hesitate to call us or email us if something is giving you troubles. This is hopefully just a good recorded resource for future reference. But we can always actually talk to each other too.
Well, if there's no further questions, I'm going to stop the recording and